At Grandpa's will reading, my sister walked away with $6.9 million. I got just $1 and a note saying, "Earn your own." Mom smirked. Some kids just don't measure up. Then the lawyer read Grandpa's final letter. Mom started screaming. "Hello, folks. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old. And when my grandfather passed away, I didn't expect to inherit millions. I didn't expect a mansion. I didn't expect luxury cars or investment portfolios. All I wanted was one final letter. One last reminder that somewhere in my family, there had been one person who loved me without conditions. Instead, I walked into the attorney's office and left with exactly $1. If that had been the end of the story, I probably would have accepted it. What I wasn't prepared for was watching my own parents laugh. Growing up, my younger sister, Emily, was the child everyone celebrated. She wasn't a bad person, but she grew up believing life would always arrange itself around her, because that's exactly what my parents taught her. If Emily wanted dance lessons, she got private instructors. If I wanted piano lessons, Mom suggested I borrow books from the library and teach myself. If Emily earned average grades, Dad took the family out to dinner because she'd tried her best. When I graduated at the top of my class, Dad smiled, shook my hand and said, "That's what we expected." Those 5 words followed me for years. Nothing I did was ever extraordinary. It was simply expected. After a while, you stop chasing praise that never comes. Instead, you learn to survive without it. By the time I graduated college, with a degree in civil engineering, I'd already accepted that my parents weren't going to change. So I stopped trying to impress them. I found a job with a construction firm in Denver, rented a small apartment, and slowly built a life that belonged to me instead of their expectations. Ironically, the more independent I became, the less interested my parents seemed in my life. Mom called mostly to talk about Emily. She found another amazing apartment. Emily got promoted. Emily and her boyfriend are thinking about buying a vacation home. Sometimes I'd listen for 20 minutes before realizing she'd never once asked how I was doing. It stopped hurting after a while. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The only person who never treated me like I was second place was Grandpa Richard. He lived about an hour outside the city, in the same farmhouse he'd owned for decades. Every month, I'd drive out to spend a Saturday with him. Sometimes we'd fix old furniture together. Sometimes we'd cook. Sometimes we'd simply sit on the porch, drinking iced tea, while he talked about Grandma. He never compared me to Emily. He never asked why I wasn't doing more. He just enjoyed my company. One afternoon, about 2 years before he passed away, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Claire, are you happy?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Not my parents, not relatives, not even most friends. I thought about it for a long time. "I think I'm peaceful." He smiled. "Sometimes that's even better." Then he reached into the pocket of his old flannel shirt and handed me a tiny brass key. It looked old, worn smooth from years of use. "What's this for?" He chuckled. "You'll know one day." I laughed. "That doesn't help." "It isn't supposed to." I slipped the key into my purse. For months, I forgot about it. Life became busy. Work demanded longer hours. Emily got engaged. Naturally, every family gathering became another celebration centered around her. My parents paid for her engagement party, bought her a luxury SUV as an engagement gift, even helped her and her fiancé put a down payment on a large house. One evening, I quietly asked my mother, "How are you paying for all of this?" She smiled proudly. "We've planned well." I nodded. I genuinely hoped they had, because none of it was my business. Then Grandpa became sick. It happened gradually. At first, he insisted it was just old age. Then came the hospital visits, then the specialists, then the quiet conversations doctors have with families in hallways. Cancer, aggressive, untreatable. The last time I visited him, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. But his smile hadn't changed. He squeezed my hand. "I need you to promise me something. Anything, no matter what happens after I'm gone. Don't let money decide how much you think you were loved." I frowned. "Why would you even say that?" He simply smiled. "Promise me." "I promise." He nodded. "Good." Then he changed the subject. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about baseball, old movies, Grandma's terrible cooking. Neither of us mentioned death again. He passed away 3 weeks later. The funeral was beautiful. Hundreds of people came, former coworkers, neighbors, friends. It seemed everyone had a story about Grandpa helping them at some point in their lives. That didn't surprise me. Helping people was simply who he was. 3 days later, our family gathered at the attorney's office for the reading of his will. The conference room felt strangely cold. Emily sat between my parents, wearing an expensive black dress. Mom kept reassuring her. I'm sure Grandpa took good care of you. I didn't say anything. I honestly wasn't thinking about money. I was still thinking about the empty porch where we'd spent so many Saturdays together. The attorney, Mr. Harrison, greeted everyone politely before opening a thick leather folder. He began reading several charitable donations, a few gifts to longtime friends, then family. Grandpa's vintage truck went to an old friend who'd helped restore it. His woodworking tools went to a local trade school. His military medals were donated to a veterans museum. Then came Emily. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses. To my granddaughter Emily. He paused. I leave my investment portfolio, valued at approximately $6,900,000. Emily gasped. Mom grabbed Dad's hand. Dad actually laughed. I knew your grandfather always appreciated ambition. Emily looked stunned. She immediately burst into tears. Oh my God. Grandpa. Mom hugged her tightly. I told you he knew your worth. I simply smiled. Good for her. If Grandpa had chosen to leave everything to Emily, that was his decision. I meant that. Then Mr. Harrison turned another page. And to my granddaughter Claire. I looked up. I leave the sum of $1. The room fell silent. I blinked. Surely I'd misheard. $1. Mr. Harrison nodded. That is correct. Before I could process it, Dad let out a quiet laugh. Mom looked directly at me, then smiled. You always said you wanted to make your own way. Emily looked uncomfortable. She started to speak. Dad interrupted her. Looks like your grandfather agreed. Mom leaned back in her chair. Some children simply don't measure up the way others do. Those words landed harder than the inheritance itself. I looked down at the table, not because I was embarrassed, because Grandpa's last conversation echoed in my mind. Don't let money decide how much you think you were loved. Had he known this would happen? Had he expected it? I couldn't make sense of any of it. Mr. Harrison quietly closed the folder, then looked directly at me. His expression was different now, more serious. He paused. One final item. My parents barely looked up. Dad smiled confidently. I think we've heard enough. I'm afraid you haven't. Mr. Harrison reached into his briefcase. This time, he didn't remove another legal document. He removed a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. For Claire, read this last. The room fell completely silent. I stared at the envelope, then back at the attorney. Something told me Grandpa wasn't finished speaking. Sometimes, the smallest inheritance is only meant to keep everyone from leaving the room too early. As the attorney carefully opened Grandpa's final letter, my parents still believed the story was over. They had no idea Grandpa had saved the most important part until the very end. The attorney looked around the conference room before breaking the seal on the envelope. My parents barely paid attention. Mom was still smiling at Emily. Dad leaned back in his chair, as though everything had already been settled. Mr. Harrison unfolded several handwritten pages. Then he looked directly at me. Claire, your grandfather instructed me to read this aloud, in front of everyone. The room became completely silent. He began reading. To my granddaughter Claire, if this letter is being read, then you've already learned that I left you $1. Before anyone judges that decision, I ask them to stay seated until the end. Dad smirked. I don't think that's necessary. Mr. Harrison looked at him. It is. Then he continued. Claire, if you're hurting right now, I'm sorry, but I need you to trust me one last time. I have watched you spend your entire life believing that being overlooked meant you weren't loved. You were wrong. I felt tears forming before he even reached the next page. You were the only grandchild who visited without asking for anything. You repaired my porch when I couldn't climb the ladder anymore. You drove me to doctor's appointments. You sat beside me during chemotherapy when everyone else said they were too busy. You loved me without expecting an inheritance. The room was so quiet that I could hear my mother breathing. Mr. Harrison turned another page, which is exactly why I could never leave my life's work in your parents' hands. Dad's smile disappeared. What does that mean? The attorney ignored him and continued reading. The investment portfolio left to Emily is real, but it isn't hers to keep unconditionally. Emily frowned. What? Mr. Harrison reached into the folder and removed another document. This, he said calmly, is the trust agreement. He handed copies to everyone. Emily looked confused as she scanned the pages. So I own it. Mr. Harrison shook his head. No, the assets remain in trust. You are only the income beneficiary. She stared at him blankly. I'm sorry, what does that mean? It means you receive scheduled distributions. You cannot sell the investments. You cannot withdraw the principal. You cannot borrow against it. You cannot transfer ownership. And every distribution is reviewed by an independent trustee. The excitement vanished from Emily's face. So, I don't actually control the money, correct? Dad leaned forward. This is ridiculous. Mr. Harrison calmly adjusted his glasses. Your father anticipated that response. He continued reading Grandpa's letter. My son and daughter-in-law have spent years confusing generosity with favoritism. Money given without wisdom becomes a burden instead of a blessing. I will not allow my life's work to become another tool for rewarding entitlement. Mom's face turned pale. The attorney turned to the final page. As for Claire, the brass key I gave you opens safe deposit box 214. Only you have legal access. My hand instinctively moved toward my purse. The key, I'd carried it for 2 years. Mr. Harrison smiled gently. I have that box's paperwork ready. Dad interrupted. What's in the box? The attorney looked directly at him. I've been instructed to discuss its contents only with Claire. Mom immediately stood. We're family. No, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. I'm following my client's legal instructions. Dad's voice became louder. You're telling us she gets $1, while Emily gets nearly $7 million. Mr. Harrison folded his hands. No, I'm telling you I haven't finished. He looked back at me. Claire, would you like to open the safe deposit box today? I nodded quietly. Yes. Half an hour later, the attorney and I were alone in the bank's secure vault. He unlocked the outer mechanism. I inserted Grandpa's brass key into the second lock. The door clicked open. Inside wasn't stacks of cash. It was much simpler. A leather folder, a small wooden box, and another sealed envelope. The attorney waited while I opened the folder. Inside were property deeds, several commercial buildings, 2 apartment complexes, a warehouse leased to a manufacturing company, investment statements, business ownership documents. I looked at the attorney. I don't understand. He smiled. Your grandfather never believed in leaving wealth that could disappear overnight. He believed in leaving assets that produced steady income. I looked back down. The estimated value exceeded $8 million. More importantly, every document listed one owner, Claire Richardson, no trustees, no conditions, no restrictions. I looked at him in disbelief. So, this is mine? He nodded. Your grandfather transferred every one of these assets into a private holding company 3 years ago. You became the sole beneficiary the day he passed away. I couldn't speak. Then I remembered the small wooden box. Inside was Grandpa's favorite pocket watch. Beneath it, one final handwritten note. Claire, if you're holding this, then my plan worked. Your parents and your sister judged your worth by what they believed you received. Now you'll know who celebrates your happiness and who only celebrates your money. Don't waste your life trying to prove your value to people who've already decided not to see it. Build your own future. Help people because you choose to, not because they demand it. And every time you look at this watch, remember, the greatest inheritance I could leave you wasn't wealth. It was freedom. I held the pocket watch tightly in my hands. For several moments, neither of us spoke. When we returned to the conference room, everyone stood up. Dad immediately asked, Well? I looked at him, then at Mom, then at Emily. Finally, I smiled. Grandpa left me exactly what he wanted me to have. Mom stepped closer. How much? I thought about Grandpa's letter, then quietly answered, Enough. Dad became frustrated. We deserve to know. I gently shook my head. No, for the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking their approval. And for the first time, they couldn't use money to measure my worth. I simply thanked Mr. Harrison, slipped Grandpa's pocket watch into my purse, and walked out of the office. No argument, no revenge, no celebration, just peace.